I'm going to tell you about one of the most important psychology books that I've read in some time. Now, this is a foundational text in the study of self-regulation. Now, self-regulation is essentially the study of how people stay on track, how people govern their impulses and their behaviors, which is very important for health psychology to make sure that you control yourself, that you're making healthy dietary choices, for example. And it's especially important for the study of emotion regulation to help people with anxiety and depression, for example. Now, the book I'm going to tell you about is on the self-regulation of behavior. And this was written by these great scientists, Charles Carver, which is on the right, and Michael Scheier, which is on the left. So it's Carver and Scheier, was in 2001. And when it first came out, the book was rather speculative, right? So we know a few different theoretical ideas. Well, we have all these ideas from different studies, and we're going to put it together into a theoretical framework, and then we can use this for future research. And it turned out that, well, a lot of what this book predicted actually held up decades later. And so this is you can think of it as one of the foundational texts in the study of self-regulation. And the basic idea is that, and I'm going to give it away right now, the basic idea is that if you have a set of goals, a system of goals, and you monitor your progress toward your goals, then your emotions will work with you rather than against you. That's the basic idea. And you have all these different areas of psychology, and they have all different, well, you could almost imagine them as different metaphors, right? So the psychoanalysts, the Jungian people, for example, they say that, well, you're not so much a person as you are a set of motivations, and you want to make sure that those motivations aren't pulling against each other. You have the cognitive people who say that, these are the cognitive psychologists who say that, well, you can kind of think of people as like computers. So you have the input going in, the behavior coming out, and then there's some calculation going on in the middle, attention, memory, perception, and so on. Okay, well, and all of these perspectives of psychology, they're all accurate, they're all true, but you know, psychology is a complicated subject, so you kind of have to know all of them at once. And the basic idea of self-regulation is this here, the feedback loop. So the theory that Carver and Scheier are discussing, they propose, is called control theory. And it's not about being controlling, but it's about how you control your own behavior and your own emotions. And it's based on an old, well, this is actually a computer model, a computational idea called a negative feedback loop. They use it a lot in engineering. And, well, it's an idea that's come outside of psychology, but then again, so is, for example, a lot of our studies of the mind in cognitive psychology, a lot of that has come from computer models as well. And so even though it comes from a different field, it's rather useful. And the basic idea of a feedback loop is you take an input, so you look at where you are in the world, and then you compare that to a goal, right? So you have, up here you have input compared to goal, and then it's compared with the triangle. And so you see where you are related to the goal. And then based on that, a feedback system, a negative feedback system, it's called negative because it tries to, if it sees a difference, it reduces the difference between them. Right? So a classic example would be a thermostat, that if the temperature is too high or too low from the goal, it reduces the difference between what is and what should be. And so Carver and Scheier's basic idea is that your emotions are motivations which are produced by seeing where you are compared to your goal. And their basic idea is that if you see that the distance between you and your goal is decreasing, that you're moving toward your goal, it's going to produce positive emotion to keep you going. But if you, so that's one loop they talk about, they call it the approach loop. Because, you know, you see, oh, am I getting closer? Yes, keep going. Am I getting closer? Yes, keep going. Am I getting closer? Yes, keep going. So that's the approach one, positive emotion. But then they say, well, there's also the avoidance loop, which is that you have some threat. They call it an anti-goal, and that when there's an anti-goal, it's a threat, but they call it an anti-goal. That if you move away from it, it decreases your level of negative emotion, right? So threats produce negative emotion, and you want to reduce and when a threat is perceived, it produces negative emotion, and the further away you move from the threat, the lower your negative emotion becomes, and that moves you toward goals and away from threats. Now, so that was Carver and Scheier's idea, but the modern emotion regulation and self-regulation literature has kind of simplified it, because you can't really talk about something being a threat unless it's a threat to a goal. So if I have a tiger that's chasing me, it's trying to kill me, you say, oh, the tiger's a threat. It's like, well, it's threatening my goal of survival. And so you can't have a threat without a goal. And so another way of thinking about it, which the more recent literature has kind of simplified this, they say, okay, you're here, the goal's here, you move toward the goal, positive emotion, something in the way, negative emotion, there's something in the way. Okay, and then what Carver and Scheier say above that is that it's not just that you're moving toward the goal, you're also looking at the speed at which you're moving toward the goal, right? So if you have a goal and you're moving away from it, negative emotion, that's like anxiety, you're moving toward it, positive emotion, that's like excitement, that's motivation. But if you're stationary, it's like you're not doing anything, well, that's negative emotion as well. So if you're stationary, if you're still, well, then you kind of feel a bit lost and empty and depressed. And so, well, again, that's kind of your brain's way of punishing you from not moving toward goals. And so the idea here is that the behaviorists had this idea that you are rewarded and punished by stimuli, right? So the stimuli comes in and it could be a reward or a punishment. But the self-regulation models, they say no, that information from the world doesn't itself tell you how to be motivated. What you do is you take in information from the world, and that information is a signal which tells you whether you're moving toward or from a goal. And so the idea is that the reward and punishment is your own brain, your limbic system, the emotion circuitry of your brain, rewarding you when you're on track and punishing you when you're not. Okay, so then what happens when you've attained one goal? Well, then you need to get another one. So it's kind of, this is a quotation they use, it's kind of like a shark, right? If a shark, especially if it uses obligate ram ventilation, which a lot of sharks have, if a shark stops swimming, it can't breathe, it just suffocates. And so, kind of like a shark, you need to keep moving forward in the world. If you have one goal, you have to get another, you have to get another. You need to be moving towards something at all times in order to feel motivated. And the way you do that is that you actually set up a hierarchy of goals. I have one goal, and then I have another, then I have another, and they're not separate, disparate goals. They're set up in such a way that I've achieved one, which will allow me to achieve another, and another, and another, and another. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up to class, and then that's going to help me on this assignment, and that's going to help me pass this course, and then that's going to help me become an assistant psychologist so that I can help these people who need helping, right? And so you have all these goals that eventually line up toward your values. So that's the idea. You need a hierarchy of goals. And you think, well, so these are all these claims, but what's the evidence behind it? And there's a few lines of evidence. And one line of evidence is from the industrial, otherwise known as organizational psychology, which is if you want to motivate your staff, you give them goals and you give them feedback toward them. We also know that this is true because of the neurobiology. So it is the case that a lot of positive emotion, well, there's really two types of positive emotion. One of them is called consumatory, otherwise known as hedonic or satiating reward. Now, you can get a little bit of positive emotion by eating or drinking, but if you want sustained positive emotion, you have a goal that you move toward, right? Because what's happening is that you have in your reward circuitry, which long story short, vast oversimplification, it kind of runs on dopamine. What happens is that whenever you're moving toward a goal, whenever you have perception that you move toward a goal, your dopamine system says, "Oh, look," and then you keep going. Well, it's the reward circuitry within the ventral striatum, particularly, and so it says keep going. And then we also know that people tend to have different set points in terms of their level of emotion, in terms of their goal. So, some people who are more nervous are more sensitive to signs of threat. Some people who are more extroverted are more sensitive to signs of moving towards your goal. If you're more conscientious, you're more sensitive to movement toward the set of goals in accordance with your values. This is a diagram from my PhD. The rest come from Carver and Scheier's book. So, And that, when I said that there are differences in personality, refer to differences in this self-regulation system. Well, that's called cybernetic big five theory. That's what the diagram was showing, and that diagram is based on a recent paper. It's a few years old now, but a recent paper by Colin de Young, who is a personality psychologist who's very much influenced by this kind of theory. Okay, so what do we get from the end of it? Well, you want to regulate yourself, so you get a goal, right? And it needs to be a goal you can achieve, because one thing you see with clinical depression, for example, is that if people who are depressed tend to set the goals far too high, so, well, you never achieve anything, and so you're going to feel empty and demotivated. And so what you should do is you should have a goal, and after that you should have another one, you should have another one, right? Because the goal structures are self-defeating, because they motivate you to achieve the goal, and then the goal structure is gone. And so what you should do is you should kind of play your life like it's a video game, in which you have one goal and then another and then another and then another and then another, and then that will align with your values, and so that will allow you to gain a sense of meaning in life. And so, well, and so this is one of the foundational, most important books in the field of self-regulation, and I consider it to be one of the most important psychology books I've ever read.